there comes a moment in an INFJ's life when something shifts, quietly, powerfully, and without permission. It's the moment they stop living as the version the world shaped through pressure, expectation, and emotional responsibility, and finally step into the version they were meant to become. This transformation isn't loud. It isn't dramatic. It happens in silence, in reflection, in the spaces where no one is watching. But when it arrives, everything about the INFJ changes. Their energy, their choices, their relationships, their boundaries all reset into alignment with their true self. For years, INFJs adapt. They soften themselves to keep peace, shrink themselves to avoid conflict, and carry emotional weight that was never theirs to begin with. But the final form emerges when they realize that survival is not the same as living, when they stop apologizing for their intuition, when they stop dimming their depth, when they stop molding themselves to be easier for others to handle. The world loses the version it tried to shape and gains the version the INFJ was always meant to be: grounded, self-defined, psychologically untouchable. If you want more deep psychological breakdowns about INFJs, their transformations, their hidden strengths, and the internal shifts that change everything, make sure you subscribe to Brainy Quiet Mind so you never miss what comes next. Before we begin, drop the word becoming in the comments if you're ready for the first stage of the INFJ's final form. They stop suppressing their intuition and begin trusting it fully, even when others doubt it. This is the moment an INFJ steps into their final form, when the quiet, inner knowing they've carried their whole life becomes the compass they no longer apologize for following. Their intuition, once softened to avoid judgment or misunderstanding, rises with unmistakable clarity. They no longer second-guess the signals they feel in conversations, relationships, or environments. Instead of asking, "What if I'm wrong?" they begin asking, "What if this feeling is trying to protect me?" And for the first time, they honor the answer. This shift is subtle on the outside, but internally it is a revolution. The reclamation of a sense that has always been their greatest strength. As this trust deepens, their entire way of navigating the world changes. They no longer allow others to talk them out of what they already know. They stop ignoring emotional inconsistencies just because someone insists their intentions are pure. They stop staying in draining situations simply because people expect them to. Their intuition becomes a filter, a guide, a truth detector that cuts through manipulation, confusion, and performance with surgical precision. Others may doubt them, question them, or accuse them of overthinking. But the INFJ no longer bends to that noise. They know what they know, and they stand in it with quiet conviction. Their decisions become cleaner, faster, and more aligned because they finally trust the voice within instead of the voices around them. And as they embrace this intuitive power, the world responds differently to them. People can no longer mislead them, drain them, or shape their choices. Opportunities begin aligning effortlessly because they stop forcing paths that were never meant for them. Relationships become healthier because they no longer ignore red flags or suppress their instincts to maintain harmony. Their life shifts from reactive to intentional, from hesitant to steady, from fragmented to whole. Trusting their intuition is the moment an INFJ stops living as a diluted version of themselves. It's the moment they rise into clarity, authenticity, and self-guided strength. No apology, no doubt, no turning back. They let go of people-pleasing and start making decisions based on alignment, not approval. This is the turning point where an INFJ stops bending themselves into shapes that make others comfortable. For years, they've been the ones who adjusted, softened, accommodated, and carried emotional weight to avoid disappointing anyone. But something changes when they reach their final form. The exhaustion from constantly shape-shifting becomes louder than the fear of being misunderstood. They begin to realize that peace built on self-betrayal isn't peace at all. So they release the instinct to manage everyone's feelings, and for the first time, they choose what aligns with their soul, rather than what earns applause. This shift is not loud, but it reshapes everything about how they move through the world. As this transformation unfolds, their decisions become bolder and cleaner. Instead of wondering who might be upset, they ask whether the path is right. Instead of accepting relationships out of obligation, they evaluate whether those connections nourish their growth. And instead of apologizing for choosing themselves, they stand firm in the understanding that self-sacrifice is not the same as love. This alignment-based living feels foreign at first, almost rebellious. because INFJs has spent so long prioritizing harmony over truth. Yet with each decision made for the sake of authenticity, their confidence strengthens. They no longer need others to validate the choices their intuition has already confirmed. And when approval is no longer the currency they chase, their presence changes. People can feel the difference. The INFJ is no longer persuadable through guilt, pressure, or expectation. They no longer stay silent to keep the peace or say yes to avoid conflict. Their boundaries sharpen, their voice becomes steady, and their energy feels grounded in something unshakable. Life around them reorganizes. Relationships shift, opportunities open, and dead ends fall away, because alignment naturally clears everything that doesn't belong. Walking away from people pleasing is the moment the INFJ stops living as a reflection of what others want and steps fully into who they were meant to be. It is quiet, powerful, and irreversible. They stop absorbing emotional burdens that aren't theirs to carry. This marks the moment an INFJ finally realizes the weight on their shoulders was never meant to be theirs. For most of their life, they've instinctively absorbed tension, sadness, anxiety, and conflict from the people around them. Not because they were asked to, but because their empathy made it impossible to ignore. They've played the role of emotional anchor, healer, interpreter, and protector in silence. But in their final form, something shifts. They recognize the difference between compassion and self-sacrifice. They stop stepping into storms that others created. They stop carrying pain that wasn't born in their own heart. And instead of taking responsibility for everyone's healing, they begin focusing on the well-being they neglected within themselves. As this shift settles into their behavior, their emotional boundaries strengthen with surprising clarity. They no longer internalize every sigh, every change of tone, every unspoken wound in the room. They don't rush in to fix problems that others refuse to confront themselves. They don't soak up negativity just to keep the atmosphere balanced. Instead, they allow people to hold their own emotions, their own consequences, their own journeys. This is not coldness, it's wisdom. The INFJ understands now that absorbing someone else's turmoil doesn't save them. It only erodes the INFJ's spirit. So they let the energy pass through instead of attaching to it. They observe without absorbing, care without collapsing, support without sacrificing themselves. As they reclaim this emotional space, their presence transforms. Their energy feels lighter, stronger, more grounded. People sense that the INFJ is no longer an emotional sponge available on demand, and suddenly, manipulative or draining individuals lose their power. Healthy connections flourish because the INFJ now offers empathy from a place of abundance, not depletion. Their life becomes clearer, their decisions sharper, and their spirit more protected than ever before. When they stop carrying emotional burdens that were never theirs, they finally experience a freedom that feels like breathing deeply after years of shallow air. It is one of the most profound signs they have stepped into their true, untouchable form. They form unbreakable boundaries that no guilt, pressure, or manipulation can cross. This is the moment an INFJ stops being shaped by external demands and finally becomes the architect of their own emotional world. For years, their boundaries were permeable, softened by empathy, bent by obligation, or dissolved entirely when someone they cared about needed them. But when they reach their final form, the INFJ realizes that protecting their peace is not selfish, it is essential. These new boundaries are not loud, aggressive, or confrontational. They are quiet lines drawn with certainty, invisible to the eye but immovable in practice. No guilt trip, no subtle manipulation, no emotional pressure can make them step outside what feels right for them again. As these boundaries solidify, the INFJ's behavior shifts in ways that others often don't recognize at first. They stop saying yes out of guilt and start saying no out of alignment. They stop over-explaining themselves to justify their limits. They walk away from conversations that drain them, environments that suffocate them, and relationships that take more than they give. People who once relied on their softness may be startled by the change. The INFJ is no longer accessible in the same unquestioned way. But this newfound firmness is not bitterness, it is clarity. They know exactly what they will allow into their life and what they will no longer tolerate, even if that means disappointing others. As these boundaries take root, the INFJ becomes anchored in a strength that feels both peaceful and powerful. They draw energy from within instead of losing it to everyone around them. They stop absorbing chaos because chaos no longer has easy access to them. The world begins to treat them differently because the INFJ treats themselves differently. People who respect them rise closer. Those who depended on exploiting their kindness fall away. And through it all, the INFJ stands calm, unwavering, and self-possessed. Forming unbreakable boundaries marks the point where they stop surviving relationships and start choosing them. It is one of the clearest signals that the INFJ has become their fully realized, untouchable self. They embrace their depth instead of hiding it to make others comfortable. This is the moment an INFJ stops dimming the very part of themselves that makes them extraordinary. For most of their life, they've learned to soften their intensity, their deep thoughts, their emotional insight, their ability to see layers beneath the surface of everything. They've watched people flinch at honesty, get unsettled by intuition, or become intimidated by the quiet accuracy of their perceptions. So the INFJ learned to shrink, to speak lightly, to hide their depth so others wouldn't feel exposed. But in their final form, they stop apologizing for the way their mind and heart work. They allow their depth to exist in full view, not as something to conceal, but as something to live by. As this inner acceptance unfolds, the INFJ's communication changes. They no longer filter their thoughts into palatable fragments. They no longer pretend to be indifferent when something moves them profoundly. They no longer disguise clarity as confusion just to avoid overwhelming someone who prefers shallow waters. Instead, they speak from the core, not the surface. Their insights become sharper, their questions more precise, their presence more grounded. Some people lean in, drawn by the sincerity and intensity they once hid. Others step back, unable to handle the weight of authenticity. And the INFJ finally understands that both reactions are revelations, not reflections of their worth, but reflections of alignment. When they embrace their depth fully, their world transforms. Relationships become richer because they no longer surround themselves with people who fear truth. Opportunities align because they are no longer pretending to be someone lighter or smaller. Their creativity rises, their intuition sharpens, and their sense of purpose becomes unmistakably clear. They show up as the whole version of themselves, layered, complex, intuitive, emotionally intelligent, and the world reshapes accordingly. Embracing their depth is the point where the INFJ stops living in fragments and steps into full coherence. It marks the rise of who they were always meant to be, not a softened version, but the complete, undisguised, magnetic self they once hid in shadows. They detach from toxic dynamics instantly, without second chances or explanations. This marks the moment an INFJ stops negotiating with patterns they've already decoded. In the past, they tried to fix, understand, or heal the people who hurt them. They gave grace, patience, and empathy long after the situation had proven itself harmful. But in their final form, the INFJ no longer entertains emotional confusion. The second their intuition registers toxicity, manipulation, disrespect, inconsistency, entitlement, the connection dissolves. Not dramatically, not with confrontation, not with warnings. They simply step out of the dynamic with a calm, decisive detachment that feels like a door closing silently but permanently. As this shift becomes embodied, others begin to notice the INFJ no longer struggles with guilt or emotional bargaining. They don't explain. They don't explain. They simply understand. They don't offer closure to those who repeatedly violated their boundaries. And they don't revisit situations their intuition has already labeled unsafe. Their withdrawal is clean, graceful, and unwavering. Toxic individuals feel this detachment sharply because it removes the emotional leverage they once depended on. The INFJ stops reacting, stops engaging, stops giving emotional fuel. And without that fuel, manipulation loses its power completely. When this ability to detach fully matures, the INFJ's energy transforms. Their inner world becomes quieter, clearer, and more protected. They have no interest in cycles, drama, or emotional labor that leads nowhere. Instead, they invest their time only in reciprocal, supportive, grounded relationships. Their boundaries no longer bend. Their intuition no longer waits. Their heart no longer tolerates what threatens its peace. Detachment becomes their shield, not out of coldness, but out of wisdom. It is the moment they choose self-respect over emotional survival, truth over attachment, clarity over conflict. And once they understand the detachment, The INFJ becomes impossible to pull back into any dynamic that dimmed their spirit. They reclaim their identity by shedding roles the world forced on them. This is the moment an INFJ finally stops being who everyone expects them to be and starts becoming who they truly are. For years, they've worn quiet roles assigned to them by family, friends, partners, or society. The healer, the listener, the peacekeeper, the one who sacrifices, the one who understands, the one who carries what others refuse to face. These roles never reflected their full identity, but they accepted them because it felt safer than disappointing others. In their final form, that compliance dissolves. They begin stripping away expectations layer by layer, realizing that none of those roles were born from their authentic self. What emerges is not a new identity, but the one they buried to survive. As this inner liberation unfolds, their choices begin to shift. They stop performing emotional labor that isn't theirs. They stop saying yes to obligations that drain their spirit. They stop molding themselves to fit relationships, environments, or narratives that limit who they are becoming. The INFJ starts making decisions based on personal truth rather than inherited duty. They reclaim passions they once minimized. They speak with clarity instead of hesitation. They reconnect with values they previously suppressed to maintain harmony. This shedding is not loud or rebellious. It is steady, intentional, and deeply transformative. Each role they release becomes a doorway back to themselves, and the world senses the difference instantly. As they reclaim this identity, the INFJ's presence becomes almost magnetic. They move with a confidence that feels grounded rather than loud, aligned rather than forced. People who only value the roles they played fall away, while those who appreciate their authenticity draw closer. Their life path sharpens, their relationships deepen, and their inner peace strengthens because they are no longer living as fragments of what others demanded. They are whole, undiluted, and self-directed. Reclaiming their identity is not just an emotional shift. It is the moment the INFJ steps into power. It is the return to the self they were always meant to be, unmasked and unstoppable. They choose a life built on authenticity, peace, and purpose, not obligation. This is the final stage of the INFJ transformation, where their decisions no longer come from fear, pressure, or expectation, but from truth. They stop participating in relationships that feel one-sided, routines that drain them, or environments that suppress their spirit. Instead of living to meet standards set by others, they begin shaping a life that reflects who they truly are. This is not about escape, it's about alignment. They choose slower mornings, deeper conversations, meaningful connections, creative work, inner stillness, and paths that nourish their soul. For the first time, the INFJ feels the weight of obligation lifting, replaced by an inner freedom they once believed was impossible. As this shift unfolds, their choices become unmistakably intentional. They say no without guilt. They say yes without hesitation. They no longer force themselves into social settings that make them feel unseen or drained. They no longer chase external validation because peace means more than approval. They no longer sacrifice their purpose for temporary comfort or for people who never truly understood them. Instead, they follow their intuition toward work that fulfills them, relationships that honor their depth, and routines that protect their energy. It is a quiet revolution, a restructuring of their entire life based on integrity rather than expectation. The world responds differently when an INFJ begins to live this way. Their presence becomes calmer, richer, and more magnetic because they are no longer fragmented by roles that never fit. Opportunities arise where they once felt stuck. The right people gravitate to them while the wrong ones fade. Their creativity expands, their resilience strengthens, and their sense of meaning deepens with every choice aligned with their inner truth. Choosing authenticity, peace, and purpose is not just a lifestyle shift. It is the moment the INFJ finally steps into their full power. They stop surviving and begin living, not as who the world shaped, but as who they were always meant to become. The final form of an INFJ isn't loud, dramatic, or explosive. It's a quiet return to their true self. It's the moment they stop living for approval and start living in alignment. The moment they let intuition lead, let peace guide, and let purpose define every choice ahead. This transformation isn't about becoming someone new. It's about finally becoming someone undiluted, someone whole, someone free. If you want more deep insights into the psychology, evolution, and inner power of INFJs, make sure you subscribe to Brainy Quiet Mind so you never miss what's coming next. Before you go, comment, I'm becoming if you're ready to rise into your own final form.